Good morning and welcome to the Team Take, where Gen Z breaks down politics in plain language. I'm your host, Thaddeus. We have a lot to break down from the past week, starting with protests all around the country where thousands of people took to the streets to protest the shooting of Renee Good, who was fatally shot by ICE agents. She was shot on Wednesday, January 7th, 2026. Local and federal agencies combined still do not know what happened in the minutes leading to the fatal shooting of Good. The Trump administration has asserted that the officer who killed Good, as she was driving from the scene, acted in self defense. Minnesota officials, where the shooting took place, call these accounts propaganda and garbage. When the New York Times saw the video and posted an analysis, it seemingly contradicted the statements made by the Trump administration. In the video circulating the internet and verified by multiple news agencies, a maroon Honda Pilot is seen blocking one of the lanes of a snowy Minneapolis residential street. The driver, who was later identified as Renee Good, advances the car, stops, and waves to other drivers passing. A truck flashes its lights while approaching the scene, and Good waves again. When the truck stops, ICE agents emerge. Two agents approach Good, tell her to emerge the driver's side door, and then one of them reach through the door. Following, a third agent leaves the vehicle, who was later identified as ICE agent Jonathan Ross, steps in front of the Honda. Then Good advances the car and Ross shoots the driver even as the car continues to advance, endangering the driver. The Honda accelerates and then crashes into a nearby pole. Ross approaches the driver, walks away, and then tells another agent to call 911. A witness tells the Times that they saw the agent attempt to rip off the door, hears the agent say stop, and then seeing Ross quickly fire. Before shooting, Good told Ross that that's fine, dude, I'm not mad. And the video moments before shows Good what could be antagonizing Ross. In an unrelated and separated incident, Ross was reportedly dragged 100 yards by a driver in a Minneapolis raid for immigration. Good is an American citizen, which shouldn't but does matter under these circumstances. In a statement this past week, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem accused Good of running over Ross as she tried to escape. I think it should be obvious what I think. Ross shouldn't have tried to shoot Good, even if she was trying to run over him, which there is no evidence of intent to try to run over. At least, the very least, another officer or Ross should have tried to tase Good before fatally shooting her. A gun should be used as a last resort, and Good will be remembered as a compassionate person by her family and friends. This is clearly not okay, and everybody should be outraged. Everyone, please stay safe in this dangerous political climate. And as we move on to somewhere in the Middle East, Iran protests all across the country have happened for the past several weeks. They are protesting the Iranian authoritarian regime, and in a time when the regime has issued a near total communication blockout. Videos and eyewitness accounts have surfaced of the regime opening fire on the protesters on the internet. Doctors say that individuals who have been protesting in Iran have been coming with gunshot wounds and skull fractures, with a doctor even going as far to call the situation a mass casualty situation. A recurring image has been surfacing from Iran recently. As the New York Times put it, rows and rows of body bags. And officials of the opposition to the regime said the majority of these people are ordinary people. Their families are ordinary families. Though the death toll and injury tolls are unclear, there are rough estimates to about 3,000 dead and still rising. Human rights groups are scrambling to reach out to their Iranian contacts to verify the information, already saying that hundreds are dead. If and when confirmed, this will be the worst violence in recent Iranian history. In a video by The Times and other news organizations, protesters can be seen screaming death to the dictator. I believe that protesters should be given a voice, just like everybody in the United States, and the Iranian regime is beginning to crumble and collapse, and you will see where this takes us in the coming weeks and months to follow. Moving on to something that happened last week, as I said, Supreme Court's ruling on a transgender woman in women's sports. The Supreme Court on Tuesday was expected to release a decision regarding transgender women in women's sports, upholding the state law of multiple states, including West Virginia and Idaho. They are being pressured to do this as a majority of members are members of the Republican Party on the bench. Becky Pepper Jackson, a sophomore in high school in the state of West Virginia, and Lindsay Hecox, a college senior in Idaho, challenged the states that they live in for the law that requires participants to play sports of their biological genders defined at one's individual birth. During the more of 3 hours of lively discussion on Tuesday, the justices dealt with concerns about fairness, scientific uncertainty, and discrimination and division along ideological lines. The three liberal justices on the bench, Jackson, Sotomayor, and Kagan, appearing to suggest the bench's decision as the court is mainly Republican leaning. I agree that transgender women do belong in women's sports as they are biologically female if they do have hormone replacement therapy. This decision is not one that could only affect Jackson and Hecox, but the country and the way American people view and face these issues. Moving on to something that has dominated news stories this past week, the Denmark and the United States meeting. Since the beginning of Trump's term, he has continued to suggest that he wants Greenland to be an American territory or state, and since the beginning of Trump's term, the Danish who owned Greenland have said that it's not for sale. However, Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio have met with officials from Denmark and Greenland. This meeting will be the first meeting since the beginning of Trump's term. Hours before the meeting, Trump suggested that NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, would be better off if Greenland was under the ownership of the United States. He said, and I quote, NATO becomes far more formidable and effective with Greenland in the hands of the United States. The United States was in all caps. The morning of the meeting, Denmark announced that it would be sending more military naval vessels to defend its territory against the threats made by President Trump ahead of the meeting. And at the request of the Danish, the Swedish are to do the same. In the statement just after the meeting ended, the European Parliament wrote that it unequivocally condemns the statements made by the Trump administration regarding Greenland, and that the threats made by Trump constitute a blatant challenge to international law, to the principles of the United Nations Charter, and to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a NATO ally. Such statements are unacceptable and have no place in relations between democratic partners. The foreign minister of Denmark told reporters in a press conference after the meeting with the United States that the Danish and the Americans have a fundamental disagreement regarding Greenland, and as he put it, they will agree to disagree. He told reporters that a high-level working group, likely to be composed of European leaders as well as Greenlandic officials, will meet to discuss Greenland's security, among other things. The foreign minister also stated that they share the same concerns as the Trump administration, and that there definitely is a high new security situation in the Arctic and the high north. When Trump voiced his concerns, he was talking relatively about China and Russia. When the foreign secretary says it is in relation to potentially the United States. Trump announced on Saturday in a social media post that he would be hitting the bloc with a 10% tariff until they come to the negotiating table on selling Greenland. That tariff that tariff does start on February 1st, and if the countries do not come to the table, Trump would increase it to 25% on June 1st. until such time as a deal is reached for the complete and total purchase of Greenland, as Trump put it on a social media post. The leaders of Europe reacted with outrage. Even some lawmakers in Washington in Trump's own party are also reacting with outrage. The president of France, Emmanuel Macron, wrote on social media that no intimidation or threat will influence us, neither in Ukraine nor in Greenland, nor anywhere else in the world when we are confronted with such situations. Excuse me. Other leaders of Europe reacted with him similarly, with him adding that Europeans will respond in a united and coordinated manner should they be confirmed. We will ensure that European sovereignty is upheld. A Republican representative from Nebraska, Don Bacon, posted on social media that just on the weird chance that Trump, is serious about invading Greenland, I want to let him know that it probably will be the end of his presidency, and that most Republicans know that this is immoral and wrong, and we're going to stand up against it. It is my belief that Trump needs to be stopped in this outrageous request to buy Greenland, and to get it through his head that Greenland isn't for sale. The European bloc remains steadfast and not bend to the will of the president, and will try to militarily seize Greenland and end up in an armed conflict with Europe, potentially ending the more than 250-year relationship with France and an almost 100-year relationship with the rest of Europe and NATO that could take decades for any president to rebuild. And next, moving on to Congress. Again, that Congress is now rejecting a host of Trump funding bills. Congress, and more importantly, Republicans are finally gaining a backbone and rejecting numerous Trump tax bills, especially those that make the deepest cuts to federal programs. The latest rejection comes on Wednesday as the House votes 341 to 79 in favor of a bill that would fund programs that Trump didn't want funded at all, including those to foreign aid, global health programs, scientific research, the arts, and more. This action comes just a few months after Congress struggled to fund the government, causing the longest federal shutdown, with a second coming during Trump's first term. The bill must now pass the Senate to avoid a Democratic filibuster, where the last one was the longest in history, lasting more than 24 hours, set by Senator Cory Booker. The top Democrat on the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Patty Murray of Washington State, said these are bills that reject the devastating cuts Trump demanded in his deeply unserious budget he sent to Congress about a year ago. Senator Murray also stated that when just about every secretary came before our Appropriations Subcommittee to advocate for those Trump cuts, I made it clear to them I planned to rip up his cuts and write a new one. And that is exactly what we are doing. Legislators are now racing to pass legislation to fund the government before January 30th. Both the House and Senate Appropriations Subcommittees have come to a bipartisan agreement on 8 out of the 12 funding bills, and some of these programs that have been long criticized by Republicans are being funded, such as Voice of America, the National Endowment for Democracy, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Financial experts say that the bills to fund the State Department and foreign assistance are more than $12 billion over what Trump wanted. Voice of America, a federal news network and an agency that Trump has long attempted to dismantle, is expected to receive over $653 million over what Trump requested. Senator Brian Schwartz, the Democratic senator from Hawaii and the top Democrat on the Senate subcommittee overseeing the State Department and foreign assistance funding, said there is a long history of international aid being viewed as an effective tool on bipartisan bias. And I think that this bill reestablishes that bipartisan foundation. The White House's proposal to cut $16.5 billion from the International Revenue Service, or the IRS, was rejected by both the House and Senate negotiators. They are now endorsing keeping scientific funding levels for the National Science Foundation and NASA, making slight trims to the budget, rejecting the proposed White House major cuts. Clearly, I agree with Congress and not the White House. The cuts proposed by the Trump administration will be detrimental to numerous fields. Congress is finally having a backfront, and I like it. I would love to see Democrats use their leverage in the appropriation process to decrease the nearly $20 billion Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, gets annually, and $75 billion the organization gets over 4 years. However, that may not be plausible, even though the Democrats do have a massive deal in the appropriations process. Moving to education, where Harvard moves to number 3 on the global schools ranking. For the longest time, Harvard has been the most productive research university according to global rankings. Harvard has since dropped to number 3, and Chinese universities are racing up that list. Because the Trump administration is slashing research funding for American schools that depend heavily on funding from the federal government, the ordering of the global rankings have shifted for universities like Harvard. Even though Trump didn't start the decline, which started years ago, they accelerated it. Phil Batty, the chief global affairs officer for the Times Higher Education, which is a British organization, said that there is a big shift coming, a bit of a new world order in dominance of higher education and research in relation to global rankings put out by the Times Higher Education. This shift will not only affect American universities as a whole, but the nation as the country falls behind in research compared to other nations like China, who hold the number 1 research school position. I believe that the United States and especially the federal government has to do something about this and fund these organizations. Congress again made that step by declining the Trump administration's funding cuts, which would have an effect on this. Moving to something that I talked about last week, and I have an update for you. It is Venezuela. As I talked about, Trump ordered the capture of dictator of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, on January 3rd. A lot has happened since then that has been related to the capture of Maduro. The director of the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, John Ratcliffe, met with the Venezuelan interim president Delcy Rodriguez in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, on Thursday. Ratcliffe was the first cabinet member and most senior American official to visit Venezuela since the seizure of Maduro by the U.S. military. Ratcliffe was in Venezuela to reinforce the Trump administration's message that it sees the interim government as the best path to national stability in Venezuela. The meeting came a day after Trump spoke with interim President Rodriguez on the phone and on the day that he spoke with Maria Corina Machador, excuse me if I mispronounced her name, the leader of Venezuela's opposition party and a Nobel Prize laureate. The meeting has been viewed by some as a stump to the opposition of Venezuela, whose supporters have been angry that Trump has not tried to put Machador's ally Armando Gonzalez into power. Gonzalez did win the 2024 election of Venezuela, according to international elections experts. Matador has also offered her Nobel Prize to Trump, who said it would be an honor to accept it, and he did accept it. Trump often claims credit for having ended multiple wars since he took office in January of 2025. Trump said in an interview 2 weeks ago that accepting a Nobel Prize would be a major embarrassment to Norway, where the Nobel Prize is awarded. I think that Trump does not deserve a Nobel Prize, seeing as he hasn't done any significant damage to any of the wars in Ukraine, Russia. He might have had a meeting with Putin, but that has not stopped the war. Or Israel and Palestine, that war is still going on if you have forgotten. He's in the process of starting a war, potentially, with Venezuela. Um, it's just not something that he deserves, and I believe that with all of my heart. And that concludes this episode of the Teen Take. However, I just wanted to go on a rant like I did last episode. I did like doing that, so let's just do that now. I'm glad to be back. I've had a lot of efforts put into this podcast, and I'm just really excited to see where this podcast takes me in the coming year. It is going to be a great journey this year, and I'm so excited to take it with all of you. But I just wanted to say, stay smart, stay kind, stay safe. I will see you all next week on Monday. Thank you. Have a good night.